I have to be honest with everyone watching this video, I hate horror films. They are just too scary for me. That by no means is meant to suggest that I write horror films off or view them as a weaker genre, it's just that generally I don't really like horror films. I'm lucky enough to not get many nightmares and I'd like to keep it that way. However, every now and then a horror film comes along that's able to break through into more mainstream audiences. Jaws did it, the Aliens and Predator films all did it, and I, someone who's not a fan of horror, really like these films. I think the reason why I personally connect with these more mainstream horror films over others is because of the characters. Usually horror films have a bunch of characters that are created with the sole purpose of dying, so these characters tend to be more stereotypical and one note in their personalities. I think it's why Cabin in the Woods was so popular, as it satirised and parodied these elements while still creating memorable characters. If I don't care about the characters, then the film just falls flat for me, unfortunately. This is the prime reason why I think A Quiet Place has been such a big hit with audiences. Yes, I do think having a megastar like Emily Blunt was a huge draw for the film, but the biggest reason why A Quiet Place connected with people was its characters. When I first watched A Quiet Place, I had never seen The Office US, so I was unfamiliar with John Krasinski, as were the rest of my family. My parents had only seen the original Office. Therefore, I didn't have any expectations of him. A Quiet Place was written, directed by and stars John Krasinski. He is the man responsible for creating such a successful new IP, and I think in all three areas, A Quiet Place is a huge success. John Krasinski is a great actor, something that has become clearer to me since I started watching The Office US. His performance as Lee Abbott is all about subtlety, since one major aspect of the character, his speech, has for the most part been removed. It's very clear through Lee Abbott's mannerisms that the apocalypse has worn him down and that he is stressed out, as he obviously would be. His relationship with his daughter, which was once very strong, has become strained, and due to her involvement in the death of the youngest son, she believes that he blames her, and the way that Krasinski plays Lee makes it seem like that very well could be a possibility. As I said before, Lee comes across as a very hardened man in A Quiet Place, but not an evil one. His hard exterior is out of necessity, and it's because he needs to protect his family that he puts the weight of the world on his shoulders. This all comes through his performance in the way he acts around his children, always putting them before him, and in how he acts around his wife, with her being the character he leans onto for support. Also, John Krasinski is a fantastic eye actor. Anyone who's seen The Office US will know this, as Jim Halpert is famous for his looks at the camera, and his eye skills continue in this film. Just from the look in his eyes, he's able to build a sense of tension and urgency in the scene, and you can always tell what his character's thinking or feeling. In The Office US, his eye acting was used to great comic effect. But here, it's a masterclass in how one can show the severity of a situation without you even needing to see the situation to understand that things are about to go down. This franchise would simply not be what it is without the inclusion of John Krasinski, nor would it be without the acting prowess of Emily Blunt. Like I said before, Emily Blunt was a huge draw for this film, and Krasinski and the team clearly knew it. She was slapped all over the marketing for this film, as she should be, and so many moments in this film are elevated by the fact that John Krasinski had so much faith in his wife to be able to pull out all the stops in this film, and that she does. The bathtub scene alone shows the raw ability that Emily Blunt possesses, and it's enough to make you ask, how has this woman never received an Oscar nomination? I also think it's great that Emily Blunt is in the role, as I believe her character is actually quite weak, at least compared to the other characters. John Krasinski has said that A Quiet Place is a metaphor for parenthood and the terrors of being a parent and not thinking you're good enough for your children. This is all reflected perfectly in his character and the child characters, but less so in Emily Blunt's. Since the metaphor is based on John Krasinski's own experiences with parenthood, it makes sense that the film focuses a lot more on his character and the children. Unfortunately, it makes Evelyn Abbott a little less interesting by comparison, as she spends most of her time at home whilst Lee tries to keep them safe. Fortunately, this isn't a huge issue, as it was the right call to focus more on Lee and the kids, as a huge moment in the film wouldn't have carried the same emotional weight otherwise, and Emily Blunt is such a great performer that just through her performance alone she was able to make Evelyn a much more three-dimensional character. Plus, her and John Krasinski have such undeniable and unsurprising chemistry in the film that it makes the love between the two characters more believable and has even more emotional weight to the film. It isn't a secret that child actors are usually not that great, yet both Millicent Simmons and Noah Jupe are perfectly cast. No one could play Reagan better than Millicent, and it's due to her that Reagan is such a standout of both films. She makes it clear that Reagan is suffering from immense guilt after her younger brother's death, and it's clear that she believes her father blames her for it. Reagan is very headstrong and stubborn and wants to prove herself to her father and, in her eyes, regain his lost love. Marcus is the complete opposite, which is why Lee chooses to focus on him in the film. He's scared, and if he can't overcome his fears, then he will certainly be killed. Noah Jupe is great at portraying Marcus's terror, and is wonderful at reminding you that this is just a little boy trying to survive in a horrific situation. A Quiet Place's story did receive a little bit of criticism, mainly for plot holes and the questionable decisions that characters made. such as getting pregnant in the apocalypse, but I feel most of them can be explained away or just hand-waved away, as there's probably not much Durex available in the apocalypse. But these story criticisms end up feeling mute in the face of everything the film gets right, with the most important part being the emotional connection that the audience gets with the characters. I also think the direction of the film was great. You can clearly see the influence of Jaws all over this film, as the monsters are never fully revealed until the end of the film. This film is also great at building tension and doesn't rely too much on jump scares, although there are a few cheap ones in here. Also, the premise of the film itself is quite unique, and I think the story takes the premise as far as it can, in terms of how the characters react to a world where silence is key. It's no surprise that A Quiet Place was a huge hit with critics and audiences, and I'm glad to see that this film has spawned a franchise that will hopefully continue the great momentum and prestige set up by the first. A Quiet Place Part 2, however, received a bit more of a muted response, which is honestly a little bit of a surprise to me, as I thought it was a really good follow-up when I watched it with my family recently. After checking, it does seem that the film was a critical and commercial success. It's just that I don't think the film received as much buzz online as the first. Which makes sense. A Quiet Place came out of nowhere, whilst a lot of people expected A Quiet Place Part 2 to be good, since John Krasinski was returning to write and direct, and the film was going to add Cillian Murphy to the mix. I'm a huge fan of Cillian Murphy. I've watched a lot of films that he's been in, including a few that you may not be familiar with, such as Breakfast on Pluto. Peaky Blinders is a show that personally means quite a lot to me, and I'm so glad that Cillian has slowly, over time, built up this great reputation and has been able to get more and more high-profile roles in Hollywood, as he deserves to. I was a little worried that he'd be an afterthought in the film, as I expected the film to focus much more on the Abbott family, but fortunately that was not the case here. Emmett is a major character in this film, second only to Reagan in my opinion, and I'm glad that he doesn't just feel like another version of Lee, or even worse, a twist villain. Emmett instead feels like a mirror of Lee. He's what I imagine Lee would have been like had his entire family died on the first day. Emmett is selfish and prioritises his own survival above all others, and it is the reason that he survived for so long, but it's also made him uncaring and willing to help others. Lee was able to maintain his humanity because of his family, but Emmett lost his when he lost his family. I think A Quiet Place Part 2 is both better and worse than the first one. I think it has a strong start, but when the characters split up, I think the film ends up feeling both weaker and stronger than the original. Everything to do with Emmett and Reagan was so interesting for me, and I love the bond the two formed. I'm glad that Emmett in no way stepped into Lee's shoes, and I like that Reagan was able to realise that she was more like her father than she ever believed. The opening scene to the film may also be the best scene out of either films, as it gives us a little bit more information about the creatures while still keeping them mysterious. It's also the first example in the film of how much extra money the sequel had over the first. I also like that we get to see a bit more of the creatures, and the CGI is by no means ugly. There's no way that A Quiet Place Part 2 could carry on the Jaws treatment that monsters got in the first film. The cat was out of the bag for the audience, and John Krasinski was wise not to try and shove the cat back into the bag. I also love everything involving the island in this film, and I like Jimon Hounsou's character until he drank stupid juice at the end of the film. Another thing is that this film is extremely tense. It's been a while since I watched the first one, so I can't remember how tense that one was. I think it was a very tense film, but A Quiet Place Part 2 takes the intensity and ratchets it up to 11. There were certainly moments in this film where I was on the edge of my seat, worried that a character was not going to make it to the final credits, although I do wonder if these moments of suspense will carry over into repeat watches. Additionally, I did say that this film was also weaker than the first in some aspects, and those would be the Emily Blunt sequences. Unlike the first, I don't think this film takes advantage of Emily Blunt being present, and her character ends up feeling like a major afterthought. Also, Marcus acts like a complete moron in the film. His character does nothing but drink stupid juice in this film. However, I do appreciate that the film at least continues his arc from the first, as he seems to take his fear head on in this film, which is best demonstrated by the final sequence where he protects his mum and younger sibling. I can't remember if they mentioned whether the baby was a boy or a girl. Plus, Noah Jupe was fantastic in the film and showed that he has a potential to be a huge name in the future, especially in the scene where his character comes in contact with a bear trap. Honestly, now I think about it, Marcus gets put in the ringer the most of any character in the film. I've seen some people refer to this film as a cash grab, but I couldn't disagree more. I definitely think that A Quiet Place Part 1 was overall a better product that fits together much better, but I also think that the high points of A Quiet Place Part 2 surpassed the best moments of A Quiet Place Part 1. Plus, just watch any behind the scenes footage for the film and you'll see how much work, effort and passion was poured into making this the best possible film that it could be. I'm excited to see where the franchise could go from here. I know that there's a sequel and a spin-off in the works. Honestly, this is the type of franchise where I think spin-offs are a must just because of how unique it is. Imagine what A Quiet Place would look like if it was set in France. Or what about a film where a protagonist slowly degrades into a horrible person, sculpted by the horrific landscape around him? The A Quiet Place films are how you start a mainstream horror franchise because firstly, they're actually both good. Even if the second didn't tickle you as much as the first, I would be genuinely surprised if anyone actually considered this to be a bad film. It's also great because of how unique it is. The monsters are almost indestructible. They have a kryptonite-like weakness, but that kryptonite is rarely on hand, which means I don't think the monsters will ever lose that threatening nature. And the addition of them being unable to swim could lead to some creatively terrifying moments where characters have to sprint to some water to survive. Plus, if any film tries to have a similar premise, then they'll be accused of copying A Quiet Place. I think both A Quiet Place Part 1 and Part 2 are excellent films deserving of your time, and I'm very excited to see what both John Krasinski and whichever other talented individuals that get involved with the franchise can do with this universe, because I feel like we're barely scratching the surface, and I can't wait to discover what else is in store for us. Let's just hope that the universe doesn't get too convoluted.